Welcome back to Kubernetes Crashcasts. I'm Sheila, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Victor. Before we dive into today's topic, I want to remind our listeners that if you're enjoying our podcast, please take a moment to rate us on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us.
Absolutely, Sheila. Your feedback helps us improve and reach more Kubernetes enthusiasts. Now let's get into today's exciting topic.
That's right, Victor. We're continuing our journey through the Kubernetes Core Concepts season, and we're wrapping up our chapter on pods. Today we'll be discussing multi-container pods. But before we start, I have a quiz question for our listeners. Are you ready?
I'm always ready for a good quiz, Sheila. Let's hear it.
All right, here's the question. In a multi-container pod, which of the following is not a common design pattern? Is it A, sidecar, B, ambassador, C, adapter, or D, coordinator?
Ooh, that's an interesting question, Sheila. It really makes you think about the different ways containers can work together within a pod. I like how it challenges our understanding of pod design patterns. Listeners, take a moment to think about this. We'll reveal the answer at the end of the episode.
Great point, Victor. Now, before we dive deeper, could you give us a quick refresher on what a pod is in Kubernetes?
Certainly, a pod is the smallest deployable unit in Kubernetes. It's like a logical host for one or more containers that are tightly coupled and share resources. Typically, we think of a pod as running a single container, but today we're exploring scenarios where multiple containers run within the same pod.
That's a great explanation. So, Victor, what exactly is a multi-container pod, and why would we use one?
A multi-container pod is exactly what it sounds like, a pod that runs more than one container. These containers are tightly coupled and work together to provide a unified service or function. We use multi-container pods when we have closely related processes that need to work together and share resources.
I see. Can you give us an example to help visualize this concept?
Of course, imagine you're running a food truck. The main container would be your kitchen where you prepare the food, but you might have a separate container for taking orders and payments. Both containers work together to run the food truck business, just like containers in a multi-container pod work together to provide a service.
That's a helpful analogy, Victor. Now, you mentioned earlier about design patterns. Can you elaborate on the common patterns used in multi-container pods?
Absolutely. There are three main patterns: sidecar, adapter, and ambassador. The sidecar pattern is when you have a helper container that supports the main container. The adapter pattern is used to standardize and normalize output. And the ambassador pattern creates a proxy for communicating with external services.
Interesting. Let's dive deeper into one of these. Can you explain the sidecar pattern in more detail?
Sure thing. The sidecar pattern is like having a sidekick for your main container. For example, you might have a main container running a web server and a sidecar container that syncs files from a Git repository. The sidecar enhances or adds functionality to the main container without being part of the main application.
That makes sense. Now, I'm curious about how these containers communicate within a pod. Can you shed some light on that?
Great question. Containers within a pod can communicate in several ways. They can use the pod's local host network, shared volumes, or even inter-process communication, IPC. It's like roommates in an apartment. They can talk face-to-face, leave notes on the fridge, or shout through the walls.
That's a fun way to think about it. Are there any challenges or pitfalls we should be aware of when using multi-container pods?
Absolutely. One common pitfall is overcoupling containers. Remember, pods are meant to be relatively ephemeral and replaceable. If you put too much in one pod, it can become difficult to scale or maintain. Another challenge is managing resource allocation between containers in the same pod.
Those are important points to keep in mind. Do you have any best practices or tips for our listeners who might be considering using multi-container pods?
Great question. Here are a few key tips. 1. Keep it simple. Only group containers that truly need to be tightly coupled. 2. Use init containers for setup tasks that need to run before your main containers. 3. Be mindful of resource allocation. Remember that containers in a pod share resources. 4. Use health checks for each container to ensure the entire pod stays healthy. 5. Document your pod design clearly, especially for complex multi-container setups.
Those are excellent tips, Victor. Now, before we wrap up, let's reveal the answer to our quiz question. The question was, in a multi-container pod, which of the following is not a common design pattern? A. Sidecar, B. Ambassador, C. Adapter, or D. Coordinator?
And the answer is D. Coordinator. While sidecar, ambassador, and adapter are common multi-container pod patterns, coordinator is not a standard pattern in this context.
Thanks, Victor. To summarize today's episode, we've learned that multi-container pods allow multiple containers to work together closely, sharing resources and network space. We've explored common patterns like sidecar, adapter, and ambassador, and discussed best practices for implementing multi-container pods effectively.
Exactly, Sheila. Multi-container pods are a powerful feature in Kubernetes, allowing for complex, tightly coupled application designs. But remember, with great power comes great responsibility. Use them wisely.
Well said, Victor. And that brings us to the end of our episode and our chapter on pods. Listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into Kubernetes core concepts. If you found this helpful, please visit crashcasts.com and consider joining our Discord community. Your support on Patreon helps us continue creating this content. Don't forget to subscribe and rate our podcast. It really helps us out.
Absolutely, Sheila. And remember, in the world of Kubernetes, you're never podding alone. Until next time, happy clustering.